What years did you work there?
You're right in a sense that no, it wasn't a bleak place, Anne-Marie. It was a great place to work.
Yeah.
The staff were very, very, very loyal, great camaraderie. It was a very cosmopolitan run hospital in terms of the medical people, and that would generally, going back to years at the start, would have been a lot of them would have been well educated, Trinity, of course, and all that. But then the staff themselves, from nursing down, would have been all from the country, mostly country people.
Yeah.
Like I, for example, I was born and reared in Portrane, but my parents my mother was Kilkenny and my father was Clare.
Oh, okay.
And indeed, that applies still in the Portrane Donabate community. It's very, very cosmopolitan as against your strictly North County Dublin.
Yeah.
I started there in North County Dublin, as in Ballybuckle, Rush, Lusk, places like that, who were North County Dublin villages.
Yeah.
Portrane was a town in itself with 2,000, close enough to 2,000 patients, with staff of up to 600 when I started in 1964. So it was a huge, huge employer, and they had the land. They supplied their own vegetables, cattle, milk. They had I don't know how many acres.
Yeah.
We as staff would have benefited from that. My parents would have. You got free veg, free milk, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The patients were from all over Ireland, because in them days, if you had a person with mental illness in Cork or Derry or wherever, they would. Derry is the north of Ireland, but in the south of Ireland, you were sort of transferred up to Portrane to get away from everyone. Yeah. Unfortunately, that was sad.
Yeah.
And then in time, the places like Newcastle and Wicklow and other provincial hospitals, Ballinasloe and all these places, began to take their own back.
Yeah.
I think that might have been mid-60s, 70s maybe.
Yeah.
Now, the services themselves, they were not divided until around the mid-80s. And by services where everybody was just in the one wards. It didn't matter whether they were, in them days, it was mentally handicapped. It's now learning disability. Yeah. You had the psychiatry of old age, and you had psychiatric patients all together.
Okay.
Which was not a good thing, because our qualification was generally psychiatric nurse. Some of the staff went away to England at that time, because there was nowhere in Ireland in the 60s and 70s to train to do their general nursing.
Yeah.
And they would have come back down and worked in wards where patients were physically sick, as well as mental illnesses like schizophrenia, depression, and all that sort of stuff. They would have worked in the wards where patients might have had pneumonia or cancer or fractures or whatever.
Yeah.
And then there was a specific wards for TB and that. So the services were divided in three in the 80s.
Yeah.
Which was learning disability, psychiatry of old age, and psychiatric. Now, some of the staff went with, even though they hadn't the qualification in learning disability, they knew all about it because they worked at it for years.
Yeah, of course.
The psychiatry of old age, then they took on board, because of the shortage of staff, they took on board general trained nurses, which was great for the service, psychiatry of old age. Yeah. It was great to bring on general trained nurses, even though they had no qualification in psychiatric nursing. Yeah. They were qualified general nurses in their 40s, maybe with family rares, and came back to work. Yeah. And they were a great addition to the service. Yeah. Like most memories are fantastic. The staff were very loyal. Yeah. There was there was also, like, a lot of the patients, there was therapy all over the place. Like, the hospital provided its own bakery, its own kitchen, its own laundry, its own stores. It had a huge employment, and a lot of the patients were well enough to work at. Some of them were clerks, some of them were farm labourers from the country or whatever. Yeah. But they were all employed in a form of, as I call it, occupational therapy. Yeah. They were employed with staff to help out. Yeah. And that was of great benefit to them. There was a patients' football team. Yeah. There was dramatic societies. There was patients dancing. There was bingo. And of course there was services, both Protestant and Catholic, on Sundays. And of course there was a full-time chaplain, both Protestant and Catholic. Yeah. So, it was a huge enterprise. Yeah. Gradually over the years, the patients, the numbers came down. They were in the process, I don't know what, 70s maybe, when it was first moved to reduce the numbers, and I think it was Dr. Brown in Brendan's.
Yeah.
He was the one who first opened the doors and let the patients out type thing, out into the community. So it resulted over a long number of years the beds came down.
Yeah. And before that, would patients have kind of stayed in for life, or would they have been long term?
Most of them would have been long term.
Yeah.
A lot of them would have been there with no relations, no connections, family connections.
Yeah.
I remember on a Sunday, vividly, there would be 2 bus loads of visitors from Dublin would come down and on the train and the bus, the hospital, visiting, and they visit during the week. But a lot of the patients got no visits.
Okay.
Now, a lot of the acute illnesses like depression maybe, or drug-induced psychosis, or maybe alcoholism or drug addictions, they would be treated in the admission unit and they would be discharged to the community or discharged home with a backup service.
Yeah.
But most of the patients were long stay, you know, and suffering from different forms of mental illness, including epilepsy, which I don't think you'd be, if it was today, you would be treated in a mental hospital for epilepsy. So, I could tell you stories. I could tell you stories all day, funny stories. But you know, it was a great place to work. You know, and anybody that was born and reared in Portrane, you know, St. Edith's owed them nothing.
Yeah.
We all got well fed and watered in it. I did.
Yeah.
And then I had 4 kids myself, Adrian, Claire, Mervyn and Fergal. They did all right for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, it was a great employer, and certainly St. Edith's owes me nothing. It doesn't owe anyone that was ever born and reared in it.
Yeah.
Anyone that was born and reared in it did very, very well.
Yeah. And did most of the people who work there, most of them are, I know you're saying that they're kind of originally from the country, but most people would have worked in or lived in Portrane?
Yeah. In the early days, Anne-Marie, when staff got married, they were it happened to me as well. When I got married first, I lived in accommodation in Portrane, and then you would, based on seniority, you would get a house on the grounds.
Oh, okay.
There was probably 50 or 60 houses on the grounds. Some were for resident doctors, some were for the chief executive officer. There will be a special house for the RMS, the resident medical superintendent.
Yeah.
They would all have accommodation, and then the staff would have the houses based on seniority until such time. It came around the 70s when wages improved and women went back to work.
Yeah.
And 2 incomes. People began to move to areas like Swords mostly, Skerries, Malahide, Lusk.
Yeah.
And in time, of course, Donabay and Portrane hadn't been developed at that stage.
Yeah.
So I was 18 years of age when I left the hospital grounds, the environs of the hospital where I was born and reared.
Oh, you were actually born on because your parents
on the campus, yeah.
Oh God, that's fascinating. I saw that there was a nurses' home, but I hadn't realised that kind of whole families lived there. That's amazing.
Well, in them years it was just strictly for nurses. You know, there was a nurses' home in the hospital itself, and then there was the nurses' home over where they built the Central Mental Hospital. Yeah. That they knocked that. That was built in it was up and running in 1968.
Yeah.
Because that was the year I qualified, and the presentations were made over in what we would call the new nurses' home.
Yeah.
And as I say, most of the staff were from the country. Like my wife was from Galway, for example, and late wife, she died, and my mother and father, as I said, were country.
Yeah.
Like anyone, very few. Like I wouldn't consider myself Dublin.
Yeah.
Like I would be like a lot of people who were born and reared in the hospital grounds of country parents.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And do you remember sorry. I was just going to ask.
Sorry, Amber,
No, sorry, carry on. No, I was just going to ask, as a child growing up in the grounds, were you nervous of the patients or anything?
No, absolutely not. No, we would be. There was very little liberty for patients that time.
Yeah.
Growing up, the patients that had liberty. I remember patients would bring over waste food to my parents. They had chickens and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they would bring paper over in the evening, and they would be grand. You know, not a problem on them.
Yeah.
In them days, there wasn't that much liberty. But as the years went on, and with the advent of medication and that, far more patients are out and about on the grounds.
Yeah.
And then you'd meet them at Mass. They would be under the supervision of staff, but they were fine. It was a great education for us growing up to see people that we were instilled into us gratitude and their grateful for the grace of God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, these people with whatever deformity they had.
Yeah.
There was a children's unit specifically for children as well.
Yeah.
Young babies and stuff like that. So we were very, very aware of what your health was from a very, very early age.
Yeah, absolutely.
I tell you, we used to knock a bit of fun out of some of them,
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be tolerated today, I suppose. But they were happy enough with it, They'd join in the fun. Another huge thing, Anne-Marie, was sport.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned earlier, all the doctors and administration would be all come from backgrounds of schools or colleges with rugby and cricket and hockey and all them sports.
Yeah.
And that's why hockey is so strong in Portrane. They had very, very Gaelic football teams, senior hurling for years.
Yeah.
Back in the 50s and 60s. And that all came from the staff.
Yeah.
Who were from hurling backgrounds like Galway, Kilkenny, Tipperary, and the footballers. There was always county footballers. A few that won All-Ireland medals, staff were there, and it was huge. The handball alley, there was bowling, there was every sport under the sun there.
Yeah.
All for patients and stuff.
Wow. Yeah, I always assumed that was just the stuff.
It was a town in itself.
Yeah.
Like, there was nothing, absolutely nothing in Donabate.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Not 600 housing estates.
Yeah, the staff, as I said, were accommodated at Portrane.
Yeah.
Some of them had their own accommodation, few and far between in them days.
Yeah.
You'd get the bus from the main hall to the railway station in Donabate and the train into town.
Yeah.
There was no direct bus service or anything like that. Most of the people like me were educated in the primary school, of course, but most of us went to either the De La Salle in Skerries, the St. Joseph's in Marino, or O'Connell School in Dublin.
Yeah.
The girls were mostly the Loretto and Balbriggan, the Holy Faith in Skerries, or indeed Dominic Street, I think my sister went.
Yeah.
So there was nothing in that regard, but there was everything else, as I say, in the hospital.
Yeah. Do you know what I'm always fascinated? That building that looks like a bus stop along the cliffs. What was that, a bus stop or what was it?
Where's that, Anne-Marie?
You know when you're walking on the coast road or the cliff walk between Donabate and Portrane, the red brick, it used to always be covered in graffiti, but I see they've painted it now with the little kind of holes in the window. It looks like a bus stop, but I'm just wondering, you can't have had, maybe it was a bus stop.
A bus stop?
It's just a little kind of shelter out by itself. Maybe it was just even a shelter for people to...
Yes, I tell you, I'm with you now, yeah. Actually, over that wall, it was a sports ground.
Okay.
And them sheds that you've seen painted now, they were, when you'd be out exercising the patients and walking around the grounds, they were shelters in the event of rain.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
They were shelters. There was one in that corner you were looking at, and then there's one further down the other end of the park. That's where the sports ground was. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they always look like bus stops, but I was thinking, where would the bus be driving along here?
Jeez, it wouldn't be, no.
There were very narrow buses in those. I was thinking a bus wouldn't... It's scary enough to walk that fast.
Bad and all as we were, we didn't have a bus up there. No, that's what that was actually. They were shelters for the patients. You'd be out in the grounds and you'd get caught in rain or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
oh, brilliant. It sounds that's fascinating because I didn't realise that it was so much of a community within itself. I kind of pictured people coming in the morning and going home in the evening, so it's really interesting to see that...
most going back before my time, the staff all lived there.
Yeah.
They had the houses and then they had the nurses' home.
Yeah.
Anyone that might have been single, or indeed, in them days, there was all single nurses, that was known as the nursing home. And then they needed another nurses' home, and that's when they built that one that's now knocked to facilitate the building of the Central Mental Hospital.
Yeah.
Now, the present red brick existence as it is, there's a preservation order on that.
Yeah. So
that's not going to be knocked around like that.
Oh, is it not?
I don't know what they'll do. They'll probably convert it. I think they converted them in England, some of them into hotels and stuff like that,
So that won't be used as any part of the new hospital?
Oh, God, no. That's totally totally separate. Yeah. And the new hospital is a forensic. It's just they moved Dundrum out to Portrane.
Yeah.
And that'll be a huge employer as well, and that's totally separate from psychiatric. It'd be criminally insane.
Yeah.
You know, those guilty of stuff like anything that they like murders and rape, any damn things that they found out to be insane, that's where they'll be accommodated.
Yeah, I know, it's a bit scary. I used to live beside Dundrum actually when I moved to Dublin first, and I always was scared walking past the big high walls of the central thing, going, you nearly have a fear of somebody landing on top of you.
Yeah. But as a child, Anne-Marie, where are you from?
Donegal, yeah.
Yeah. All these things were, like you said, were we afraid? We weren't because of our parents, what we were told and taught, and never laugh at them or gimmick at them or just speak to them and say it's the same as your Jim down the road or Mary or any of your neighbours.
Yeah.
So we always had a healthy respect for them, but there was no fear in us. We were never told to keep away from them. He's dangerous.
Yeah.
You were told that in school. Oh, he's mad. They're all mad from Portrane. They're all mad down there.
Yeah.
And as a fella said to me one time, we were playing a football match. He said to the fella, he says, "You're mad." He says, they're all mad down in Portrane. And we were playing a team from town.
Yeah.
And Mick Fields was his name. He says, of course we're mad. He says, why wouldn't we be looking after your relations all our life? And he hit a nerve because your man lost it.
Yeah. As if the patients were all bred in Portrane as well.
And you got to be that way whimsical. You could expect to be told that, but you didn't take it personal. It's just the fact that it was Portrane.
Yeah.
But you can understand why people might feel intimidated.
Yeah.
By the whole thing, the way we're brought up, it's a bit like people say, people are terrible. They say Beaumont is a kip, for example. That's what they said about Portrane.
Yeah.
Beaumont is one of the best hospitals in the world.
Yeah.
Some of the best facilities in the world.
Yeah.
And some of the best treatments. And that's just it's because it has a bad name because of whatever.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, but look.
People have chips on their shoulders about things as well. They don't like to see other people having facilities and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. But that's the acreage. I'm not too sure, but they owned land. The health board at that time was Dublin Health Authority. They owned land over in Turvey.
Yeah.
Turvey is.
Yeah, the nature reserve.
That was all their land there, and then they had the land what's now Santry Stadium.
Yeah.
So there was no shortage of money there with the farming.
Yeah.
And it was an awful pity. There was afterwards they sort of regretted letting the farm go, but it would have went eventually, I'd say,
And who looked after the farm? Was it the nursing staff and stuff as well, or they was?
Not at all. No, you had a land steward.
Oh, okay.
Qualified in whatever qualification you need for that. And then he had staff working with him, separate staff, farm labourers, and then the patients who would come from a farming background would help.
Yeah.
You had to be very, very careful. The nurses would generally, if there was a group of patients, would bring the patients to where they'd be working.
Yeah.
And stay with them. But the patients were well enough to work there. And then it was just to be careful with machinery and stuff like that. Like, it was huge. Work went on, like the likes of, baling hay, all that sort of farming stuff.
Yeah.
Same as anywhere else.
Yeah.
So there was groups of patients that worked in the farmyard, as we called it, the farm. Then you had another crowd of patients would work in the garden.
Yeah.
Which did all the flowers and stuff like that, pots and plants. And then you had a group of patients might work in on the grounds, for example, cutting grass, and there was absolutely, you name it, it went on in Portrane.
Yeah. Amazing.
You name it, it went on in Portrane.
Self-sufficient.
It had its own bakery.
Yeah.
As I said earlier. It had its own kitchen. It had everything.
Yeah, amazing. And did they, was it mostly men, the patients, or was it a mixture?
Mixture. Two sides of the house, male side, female side. It was only in the latter years that the integration came in.
Yeah.
Which was very, very difficult with people not well.
Yeah, of course.
The integration was difficult, but they tried it and it's worked to a degree, but I don't think the patients were very happy. A lot of the patients just put up with it,
Yeah.
Mixed wards and that sort of stuff. Now, they didn't sleep in, but they were, You know what I mean? They were very, very uncomfortable with it. Just the same as I remember my father, in his latter years, he was in Beaumont, and it was in 1988, he was 90.
Yeah.
And they were bringing in this integration thing, and he was beside a woman in the ward. They were in the same ward, you know, which is okay.
Yeah.
Jesus, it only enhanced his confusion.
Yeah.
And he used to keep calling her Mary.
Yeah.
Which was my mother's name.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm not too sure about that. But in the psychiatric, it didn't really work that great. But the staff began to integrate more then, and really, like, it was always male staff for male patients, female nurses for female patients.
Yeah.
And then in latter years they began to integrate where men would work in female wards, not that many,
yeah.
but a lot of the women would work in male wards.
Yeah.
So that was a good thing, you know.
Yeah.
And but there was two sides of the house. If you look, I don't know whether you were ever up in East, you see the centre where the main entrance was. Each side of that, to the left was male and to the right was female.
Yeah.
And the buildings for the wards are the exact same.
Okay.
You know, they're exact same. So, and there was, as I said, there was churches for both religions.
Yeah. And would they have had what would be in a ward, like 12 people or more?
Oh, there would have been more in them days. Yeah, there'd be more.
Yeah.
There'd be, in some wards, there might even be up close to 40, which is too much.
Yeah.
In a lot of years, they got them down. But I think 30 odd would have been generally the norm, you know?
Yeah.
And in some wards, there would have been 70 or 80, but there would be bigger wards.
Yeah, yeah. God, that sounds crazy. You can imagine the noise and the...
yeah. Well, when you look back at you'd remember a lot, but there was the occasional flare up, like, you know, you were in a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah.
And it'd be born out of tensions and, you know, somebody robbing the other lads' cigarettes or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
It had to be breaking. I'd always want to be on guard with some of the real lock-up wards where some fella might be very disturbed.
Yeah.
Like the lash out, take the head off you.
Yeah. Jeepers.
But you get all the warning signs, like,
yeah.
in terms of agitation and somebody not being themselves, because that's what our biggest thing was, to be observant, you know, to watch.
Yeah.
You know, somebody just having a bad day or just relapsing, or, you know, like mental illness is all about relapsing. If the medication doesn't work anymore or whatever.
Yeah. And was it always from you were young and seeing your parents working there and then growing up there yourself, was that just always what you kind of assumed that you would go on to do?
No, actually, no. It's funny, my daughter Claire, like, she grew up in the environs of Portrane as well, but not actually the hospital itself, but they did actually. They would have been. I lived in the estate for a while when they were young, yeah. But my Claire, no way was she ever going to be a nurse.
Yeah.
Never had any aspirations. And she ended up being a nurse.
Yeah.
She's assistant director there in Vincent's.
Oh, okay.
No, I had, for whatever reason, I wanted to be a journalist.
Yeah.
And then when I came to 15, I served my time to the drapery and Switzers.
Yeah.
And I qualified at that. And then in them days, you served your time, but they didn't mean to have a job at the end of it.
Yeah.
And I did the exam for both the guards and nursing.
Oh, okay.
Funny, my mother didn't want me to do nursing. So I suppose she could see the way things went up. When you be in these places over a long number of years, you become institutionalised yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and you get into a rut. I don't know, but anyhow, I did the exam for the guards, and I got both, and I got the exam for the guards, site and everything. And I ended up in Portrane because I was called there first.
Oh, okay.
You know, that's the way it was. Like, and you'll find, just like me, a lot of the staff married nurses. It's a bit like the police, teacher, any occupation. You know, they sort of marry one another, which isn't a bad thing, I think, because you're both on the same level of being reared well, of well educated. You know, and, you know, generally marriages I've seen over the years, they work out a hell of a lot better, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
People say, why do you, blah, 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 but I don't think anyone ever took a record on that. You'll find, I've heard people say over the years about their sons, it's not a pity you wouldn't need a nice nurse, you know. Jesus, freaking hell, not every nurse is nice, but in general, I'd say, you know.
Yeah.
I would certainly have no qualms. One of the luckiest days of my life was to meet Gay, you know, and funny enough, I met her on the 4th of November 1964, which is her 19th birthday.
Oh, wow.
I never, even though we were working in Eve, I never met her.
Yeah.
I met her in the Palm Beach ballroom at Port Marnock.
Okay.
But it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
And was she a nurse as well?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And she was from Galway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting course though. But listen, thanks so much for your time. That was really, really interesting. And
I hope that.
Oh, so.
If there's anything else comes to mind, all I can say was what surprised you probably listening to me was the amount of patients that were there.
Yeah.
It was the second largest hospital in Ireland after Cork.
Yeah.
And the reason there was so many patients from different parts of the country, as I said to you earlier, was because of the fact that it was a bit of a taboo to have somebody in the family get them to hell up to Portrane.
Yeah.
And it was built. The reason it was built where it's built, there was talk at the time, Anne-Marie, of it being built on Lambay Island.
Yeah.
So the next best thing was close enough to it.
Yeah.
To deal with, 14 miles from Dublin was a huge distance years ago.
Yeah.
But the idea of it was to the most dangerous patients mentally.
Yeah.
Were invariably in Portrane.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, a lot of the time, was to get them out as far as you possibly could.
Yeah.
And you couldn't have got a more remote place in them days.
Yeah.
As the powers that be thought at the time than Portrane.
They didn't realise the city was going to stretch out.
Exactly. That's down the road too. But Portrane is an area that's, thank God, hasn't developed that much. I wouldn't object to any development now because I have one foot in the grave and the other on a bar of soap.
I tell you, it doesn't sound like that. You sound like you have a lot of years left in you.
I have more time behind me, Anne-Marie, than I have in front of me. I always lived, there's only one thing I have today, and that's today.
Yeah.
Nobody ever said I'd live to be 20, 50, 70 or 90.
Yeah. I have a granduncle down in Belmullet in Mayo, and he always makes me laugh. He sounds a bit like yourself, just has a great interest in everything, and that keeps him young. He'd talk he'd be into talking about social media and everything. But he's been saying, I think he's 84 now, and he's been saying, I'd say since he was about 60, every time you'd go to visit him, he'd say, this is probably the last time now because I won't be here the next time you come. I'll be gone now. Oh, sure. And the poor man, he's buried his wife and his son, his only son. And my own dad died. He was only 57 when he died, and Johnny is he just keeps going, and he's just a force. If we were down, I didn't see him for a long time because I was terrified it'd give him COVID or something then. But we went down and saw him recently, full of energy. Now the poor man, he's one eye that doesn't work very well, and he can't walk very far. Where he used to be a long distance lorry driver all over Europe. But some people just have plenty of life in them regardless of the age, and then you could get somebody that's...
But your health is everything, and as I say, all you have is today.
Yeah.
And my mother, I always remember her saying one of the things she always told us kids growing up was assume nothing.
Yeah.
Trust nobody and mind your own business.
Yeah.
I used to say, Jesus, wait now, what about trusting somebody? Don't worry, she says, as you get older, you'll know who to trust and who not to trust.
Yeah.
And another thing she always says is, she would have always said, the longer you live, the more hardship you're going to get.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, losing your wife, losing a family member or whatever.
Yeah.
I would never say that's the last time I'd see you.
Yeah.
Because it might be the last time I'd see you, but it'll be you that'll die.
Yeah, that's so true.
So all you have is today.
No, look, thanks so much for your time, and it was really, what I found so interesting is how much of a kind of community existed. I would have had no idea about that from, bits of reading and stuff, so that was really interesting.
Huge, Anne-Marie, huge.
Yeah, perfect.
And everybody knew one another, everybody was very helpful to one another.
Yeah.
The community spirit was unbelievable. If somebody was stuck for a bit of butter or a bit of sugar or tea or whatever, it didn't make any difference. It'd be always go down to miss somebody with that.
Yeah.
Or she mightn't have been as well off. She mightn't have been a nurse, for example.
Yeah.
She mightn't have had the same income. She might have been struggling.
Yeah.
You know yourself. Just the spirit there. You're right. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Great people. Great people.
Well, it was a pleasure talking to you anyway. And thanks very much.
Give you some time, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care anyway, and thanks so much for your time.
Keep safe. Yeah. All the best.
You too. Bye bye.